Hello and welcome back to the shop. This is an RTR WPL B1 and when I first took it out of the box it seemed quite healthy. Then I realised that the front wheel drive wasn't working and traced that to a broken drive shaft. Actually, this chassis has another charming characteristic. It goes along perfectly well on flat ground, but as soon as it encounters any sort of obstacle, something slips. In fact, now that I've demonstrated that, it won't go at all. So this would make a good donor vehicle for a project that didn't require a vehicle with a rear axle, for example. After a little fiddling around, I've used the rear prop shaft, or drive shaft, to drive the front axle, and I've removed the motor to investigate that high-speed spinning that we heard. On investigation, the pinion proved to be very tight on the shaft, but I've reinforced it with a bit of cyano, and now I'm about to refit the motor and see whether we have drive to the front axle, which is all that I ask of this thing at this point. Now to demonstrate what I'm going to be using instead of a back axle. This is a 1/16 scale excavator. It's not radio control. It's controlled by a wire and it has very few functions. It goes forwards and backwards and this arm goes up and down. The bucket doesn't work, this doesn't traverse. It's pretty toy grade. All I'm interested in, however, is the bogie that runs underneath. So here's my equivalent of a back axle. It's quite a lot wider than the truck chassis, but that won't matter, as I'll demonstrate later. I took the bogie apart and re-threaded the motor wires out here rather than out of the back of the thing. I've also done one more little piece of work. You can see that this side is as it comes from the factory, and on this side I've made a series of little grooves so that this piece of 10 by 15 millimeter, which is about 3/8 of an inch by just over ½ inch, aluminium C-channel will fit neatly in there and can be secured to these outriggers. I've got this set up on what I suspect is the flattest surface in the house to show you that by pure coincidence the height has come out absolutely correct on this thing. You can see that the steel WPL chassis member is sitting inside the aluminium and there's no gap. The whole thing is completely level. Here we're looking at the underside of the bogie because I want to show you how I fastened on these pieces of aluminium. There's a single screw going through each of these outriggers to hold this thing on. Then there's this piece which I've cut to fit into the channels like this. This gives me effectively an adjustable wheelbase for the moment. This is the longest it can be and this is the shortest. This is the back of a garbage truck and it's going to form our rear body, with most of a Ford Model Y serving as the cab. And that's not all. I first had the idea for this build a couple of years ago. The idea is that we're in a post-apocalyptic situation and this vehicle has been cobbled together by a group of people who need to relocate through possibly hostile territory. So there will be more up here. One thing I can see is that the wheelbase here is definitely too short. The front wheels are there and I'd like them to be further forward, so that means I need to stretch the wheelbase so I can slide this further back. I'll slide a few parts around, get the wheelbase set to its final dimensions and bolt this chassis up off camera. The two halves of the vehicle are finally joined together, but the way in which I did it was dictated by the conditions under which I'm working. In other words, I'm not allowed out to go shopping. I've run out of screws small enough to secure this steel channel to this piece of aluminium, so I've been forced to use cable ties, which I wouldn't do under usual circumstances. I've cut a large hole in the front of the back body. I've cut off the back of the front body, and the two will hopefully go together rather like that. Like many model makers, I'm experiencing some of the frustrations of lockdown. I've run out of solder and I've run out of flux. So I've gone back to being an 8-year-old again and twisted my wires together to test this thing. The question we're here to answer is, will the wheels turn at the same road speed as the tracks? There's only one way to find out. It looks to me as if the wheels are turning about 1.5 times the road speed of the tracks. Let's just check that again. Let's try soft sand. Well, that wasn't completely discouraging. I had been concerned about how much steering authority this vehicle was going to have, but it did manage to steer around the camera in that last test after waving its front wheels in the air like a praying mantis for a while. In the case of this vehicle, there really isn't much choice about where to position the battery. I need its weight up front to give me good steering authority. For this reason, I've built this strange little white styrene table. As you can see, it clips over the chassis rails. I'll show you. And it carries the battery's weight just 5mm above the top of the receiver and speed controller board. In other words, this vehicle carries the weight of the battery as far forward and as low as I could manage to arrange with this body. For the first time, I've got the front body mounted and the back body at the same time. Thankfully, the two parts marry up quite well. I think the next thing for me to do is to make a flip front on this white body so that I'll be able to gain access to the battery when the body's screwed firmly in place. Here's the front end with the flip front fitted. And there's the battery sitting in its little styrene tray. I have done one other thing I forgot to mention. I've lined the floor of the tray with lead sheet to help give us more of that steering authority I'm always talking about. I haven't yet come up with a way of holding the flip front closed, but I imagine what I'll do is stick a magnet there and a bit of metal here. And with that in mind, I've gone ahead and cut out the grill aperture and glued in some mesh so that my piece of steel will go over the top of that. While I had the Dremel in my hand to cut out the grill aperture, I had a little go at creating an armoured panel for the rear window, and then came up with a deliberately different arrangement for the other rear window. Obviously the windscreen aperture is going to have to be armoured as well. Once again, I'm turning to my old favourite, the trusty Airline coffee stirrer. I've got two of these. I think I'll stick one there and one there, leaving a little gap for the driver to peek through. When I built this rat rod, I used a Ford pot body, but then I sacrificed a Ford Model Y by cutting the front off to make this nose cone. I still have that body, and I'm about to heap further indignities upon the poor thing by cutting it again here. So we'll just use this bit on top of our existing Model Y. I'll show you. You can see I trimmed back the cowl, and this is the bit we want. And it'll fit here, something like that. The WPL B1, which forms the front half of this vehicle, did come with working LEDs. When I built my 6-wheel drive 1950s truck, I stole 2 of these lamp units, cut them down and used them to house the LEDs in the Kamtec Cody 1950s truck body. However, what I propose to do now is to relocate this one to here and fit them just in front of the new upper cab body. The WPL B1 body gave up its LEDs without much of a struggle, and here they are installed in the light bar with the lights now one at each end. I've drilled the cab roof, but I think I won't fit the light bar until I've painted everything. I've been thinking about the front bumper, and here we have an orange bit from the original excavator that we cannibalised, bolted to the handle of a fly swat. The WPL B1 body has given us one last contribution. Here we have the winch from the front of it. I'm going to incorporate that into the new front bumper. I've been attending to my all-important post-apocalyptic window armour, and in the gaps where I've been waiting for the various bits and pieces to dry, I've been gluing a few bits and pieces to the bulkhead of the top cab to make it look like old bits of bracketry that weren't worth removing. This is going to be quite a tall truck, and the front is narrow. Still, I'm hoping that the breadth of the tracks at the rear will keep it relatively stable off-road. I've painted the winch's cable silver and masked it off, so this is now ready to be sprayed with matte red primer. I've been working on the rest of the armour. Got some mesh here, which is from an old fly swat. This thing I had to use because it said 223 in large letters. That's an area you're supposed to cut out to accommodate the rear wheel, while on this side it said Model Y. This strange rack started out life as the roof of a 1/35th scale pickup truck. I've given the interiors of the two bodies a coat of ochre coloured paint, just to make it a bit darker when you try and look in through the windows. This chunk of body is ready for a coat of matte red primer. The front bumper looks better already, and so does the cab. There. I've just been concerning myself with how I'm going to hold the flip front down. So this piece is to go hard behind the radiator grille, and it has this steel bolt epoxied to it. My ongoing obsession with rocket-powered vehicles means that I always have plenty of 10 by 10mm firework sticks to play with. So I've taken these ones, glued 2 lengths together, and trimmed them so that they slot in there like that. I used this small chisel to carve a little dip in this piece of wood, which accepts this oddly shaped magnet. This magnet is this bizarre shape because I took the advice of old iron RC and took it from the hard drive of a dead computer, which means that it's immensely strong, nice and flat, and most importantly of all, free of cost. When I recently upgraded my MN45, I managed to get paint all over the nice polycarbonate original windscreen. I had to cut it out and replace it because I couldn't get it clean. But I've been saving this because this is going to make a perfect windscreen for one or other of the 2 screens on this thing. Probably the upper one. I've glazed all the windows except the 2 side ones at the top. I temporarily refitted the body to check the flip front was closing properly, and sadly it isn't. I've put the magnet too far forwards so the 6mm bolt head doesn't touch it. I'm going to have to move that magnet further back. Once that's been sorted out, it'll be time to turn our attention to the rear body. You may notice that I've stuck these lengths of C-channel on either side, sticking out. There's a reason for that. Although I've said this isn't to be a full-blown war rig, it should carry some sort of defensive armament. So I'm going to install a fighting gallery on either side, accessed by a door which I'll cut into the side here. And the basis for these fighting galleries will actually be the back body from this WPL B16, which has committed no crime, works perfectly, but is about to lose its back body anyway. I also rather like the look of that spare wheel assembly. It seems to be all of one unit. I've cut the B16's back body in half along its length. Here's one half just positioned on the two outriggers to show you where it will go. At the moment this balustrade is too low. I'll probably bring it up to about here. You can also see that I've put a door in the side. There's another on the other side for the people to come out onto the balcony. At the back of the garbage truck I've extended the floor from here out to here, and I want to have a vertical barrier here with a door in it. There is one more thing I need to tell you about the back body. It's actually going to be slightly taller than this. What I'm going to do is embed in the top of it the upper portion of this car. I think the car's a Ford Zephyr, and I'm only going to be using about that much, and just from here to here. In fact, I'll have to shorten the rear window a little. I'm going to make two cuts about that far apart to shorten this thing, so that from here to here is exactly the same length as the top of the garbage truck body. So, this is the bit we're keeping. Let's see what it looks like on top of the big orange garbage truck body. Okay, I think that is going to be the final full height of this thing. In the end, instead of shortening the rear window, I shortened this section because I think it looks more natural. Also, there's a feature on the roof that I think would have been very difficult to line up if I had sectioned the body here. So instead, I cut it here. Hopefully it still looks like the roof of an estate car or station wagon. Looking at these Ford Zephyr estates online, I've noticed that they're nearly always light blue and white. Usually the lower part of the body, the part that would be below this bit, is light blue, and this area would be white. But I want to bring the light blue and whiteness into this model, so I'm going to do light blue up to here and just have the roof done in white. I've given the roof its coat of rusty white and blue paint, and I've also cut these holes in the top so that people can sit in seats which I'll be fitting soon. In some ways this build's starting to resemble a game of Tetris. For example, I've made brackets and some old car seats for the people who want to sit up top to sit in, but if I fit those then I won't be able to get my hand in to screw this down to its base. In the same way, I don't want to make the fighting galleries and bolt them on earlier than necessary because they'll make this extremely unwieldy to work upon. I'm going to have to take a step back and think about the most logical order in which I can do all this. As I mentioned before, I've reached a stage where I do need to be careful about the order in which I do things. For example, it's just struck me that as I'm relying on spray paint to achieve the effects, I need to paint this before I add the fighting galleries on the side. So you can see I've masked off the top of the area where the galleries will be glued, and I've also masked off here. What I would usually do is paint this with rusty colours, salt it, and then add the top coat. But we're on lockdown and I don't have any orange paint, so I've had an idea. What I propose to do is, as you can see here, salt it very heavily and then spray the rust all over it. Then wash off the salt, and wherever there was salt, instead of having rust, I'll have the original finish. I don't know how well it's going to work. I've never tried it before. As soon as the paint's dry, I'll be able to scrape and wash the salt off and see what sort of effect I've actually achieved. Actually, it hasn't come out too badly. I'm not sure that I'd recommend this technique to anyone who hadn't run out of orange paint, but it's got me out of this hole. Here's the other side. Let's have a close-up look. This thing, by the way, is a rack for pikes or spears, which will be available on the fighting gallery to repel boarders. Here's another look from even closer up. I have made a back door for this thing, but because I'd quite like to be able to get cameras in once the thing's finished and film from within the vehicle, I've placed my back door on this part which flips up, so I'll still be able to get my arm in and get a GoPro in and out. Here's the door in position. It does open, but to give me better access for positioning cameras inside, the whole lot swings out of the way and lets us be inside the vehicle. You might not be able to see in this light, but I have fitted a dash. I also need to add a steering wheel, a driver's seat, a floor, and I need to sort out the wiring for our lights. In order to provide somewhere to support the driver's seat, I've made a sort of coffee table thing out of styrene, which is so designed such that it clip over the chassis rails like this and hold the driver figure in place. I've whittled this 1/12 scale steering wheel from 2mm white styrene, and here it is with a coat of black paint. The vehicle we're building has an upper lookouts position which I want to hold in place with magnets. As we're on lockdown and I only have 3 Dremel discs left, I decided to take the trek to the workshop, put the magnet in a bench vise and cut it in half with a hacksaw. I was very surprised to find that when I cut it with a saw, the magnet does this. That was weird. The magnet sparked when you ran a hacksaw blade over it and then almost immediately snapped into 2 pieces, which I've glued on here and here. And what they're for is to let me remove the lookout seat easily and rotate crew members, so that while the driver's retained by a rubber band and the wheel isn't glued to her fingers, she's just gripping it, the observer can wriggle into her elevated seating position like this. And she doesn't bang about because she's sitting on a foam rubber pad. When I want to take her out, I can just remove this and change crew member. There's the driver holding her wheel with her Browning 9mm handgun on the dash, and you can see here that the driver sits offset to the right, so the lookout's feet dangling down don't trouble her. I've changed my mind about using the car seats which I made to go inside this thing. Instead I'm going to use these thin wooden benches. The problem with the car seats was that they were so deep that they took up an awful lot of space inside this thing, so much so that there wouldn't have been room to do anything else inside the space other than crawl around under the car seats. So I think the remaining order of events is get these benches in, build the side galleries, work out how I'm going to hold the car roof on top. I've also had a change of heart about the windscreen which I'd fitted before, which was so damaged that it was practically opaque. I've taken it out and replaced it with a piece of thick polycarbonate from a video cassette box. I've started working on the fighting galleries. I've deliberately made them slightly different. The handrail on this side, for example, is 15mm higher than on the other side, and here I've used 8mm square section styrene for my uprights, and here I've used C-channel. Each gallery will house 2 mounted crossbows. Here's the beginnings of the first crossbow without its prod across the front, and it mounts onto this marker pen so it can traverse. This is not a vehicle for use in narrow streets. In fact, it is going to be quite large for a 1/12 scale vehicle. Progress on the fighting galleries. Each side boasts 2 crossbows, as well as armour up to the handrail on each side. My next task will be to paint this lot. I've built up another couple of layers of weathering, but that's not what I wanted to show you. This is the load-bearing bar that goes behind the cab on the MN model's FJ45. I've reinforced it with a few pieces of styrene, and this is an idea I got from Josh of RC Everyday. You can buy these little organisers quite cheaply, they're made in China. The mesh is too big for me to use on a radiator grill really. I'm going to unfold it, get the mesh out of it, and use it to cover this. Once I've done that, I've rounded off one corner and drilled a hole at each end, and this will now fit like this into these brackets that I've glued on, and it will unfold this far but no further, serving as a tailgate for loading and unloading stuff, and then a barrier so that you can be out here on the balcony while the thing's moving. Here's a close-up of one of the crossbows. As you can see, each one has twin spade grips and a windlass for hauling the cord back. I used 4 pieces of hard drive magnet to hold this down. Now it just clicks on and stays on in normal use. If I lift these 2 hooks, it folds down to its horizontal position, and I've made a little hook and eye on each side to hold the back closed. Which means that this monster build is finished!